welcome back to my channel, Numerics with Nadia. In today's video, we're going to go over algebraic equations. We're going to go over how to solve one-step and two-step equations. So first up in our lesson today, we'll go over what algebraic equations even are. And then, as always, we'll get into our practice section, and our practice section will be split into two components. The first part being how to solve one-step equations, and then the second part, how to solve two-step equations. To start off, let's go through and define what an algebraic equation is. So an algebraic equation is a mathematical sentence with four components. So firstly, it's a mathematical sentence with numbers. It also needs to have an operational symbol, whether that be adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. The third thing it must have is a variable. And the fourth and final thing that makes an algebraic equation is an equal sign. So now that we've defined this, let's go through and differentiate and compare how a one-step equation looks and what a one-step equation is compared to a two-step equation. A one-step equation is an equation that involves one mathematical operation. So any of them is okay, but it's an equation that has either addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. And an example of this could look like x plus 2 equals 3. We have a variable, we have a number, we have our equal sign, and we have one operational symbol. And in this example, it is addition. So since it just has one, this would be classified as a one-step equation. Now that we've gone over this, though, let's compare it to a two-step equation and look at the differences. So for a two-step equation, it would just be an equation that involves two mathematical operations instead of just one, right? That makes sense. So if we look at an example of that, we would have something like 2x minus 6 equals 10. And in this equation, we have two things going on, right? We have our subtraction, but we also have our multiplication between the 2 and the x, right? That coefficient of 2 shows our multiplication. So since this equation has both subtraction and multiplication, right, that means it has two mathematical operators, which would make it a two-step equation. So now that we've defined what an algebraic equation is, and we've gone through the difference between a one-step and a two-step equation, let's go through our next super important topic, and that is inverse operations. So when we go to solve any type of algebraic equation, we need to use an inverse operation. So let's go through and go over that. So I'm going to make a little table for us. We will have the operation on the top with the inverse operation on the bottom. If we go through our four main operations, which would be addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, the inverse operation of adding is just subtracting. The inverse operation of subtracting is adding. The inverse of multiplication is division. And the inverse of division is multiplication. So if this is new information for you guys, I would write this little table on the side of your sheet, so when we get to the practice problems, you'll be able to quickly refer to it. Before we get into our practice section for today, the last thing we'll go over is how to solve algebraic equations. What is our approach here? What steps are we going to take? We'll go over that now. So the first thing we're going to do when we get our algebraic equation is we are going to isolate the variable. When we do that, we're going to see what operations are surrounding the variable and what inverse operation do we need to take to be able to get rid of that. And then we will get into solving, right, algebraically. So that is our plan. That's how we're going to approach our practice section. So now that we've gone over all of this information, let's finally get to our practice section. We're going to do a few examples of one-step equations and a few examples of two-step equations. The directions for our practice section say to solve the given equation. And as always, we need to show our work. The way we're going to show our work here is very important. You're going to use this all throughout algebra. So try to use the same setup that I am using here because it's very clear and very easy to keep track of everything. So our first practice question for today, for number 1, we have m plus 7 equals 8. So we're going to look at our m. In order to isolate that m, we have addition going on. So that means that we would have to subtract here. What we do to one side, we will do to the other side. So we will subtract that 7 on both sides. When I do that, the plus 7 and the minus 7 will cancel, and I will be left with just m on the left-hand side. When I look at my right-hand side, for 8 minus 7, I end up getting 1. So our answer for number 1 will be m equals 1. So that was an example with adding. Now we'll get into number 2. For number 2, we have 8p equals 72. So what's going on between the 8 and the p? Well, they're being multiplied together. And the inverse of multiplication is division. So we're going to go through and divide by 8 on both sides. When I do that, the left-hand side will just simplify to p. And then for the right-hand side, we know that 72 divided by 8, well, that just gives me 9. So our answer for number 2 would be p equals 9. Now we'll get into our third question. For number 3, we have x minus 10 equals 5. What is happening? What is right by our variable? How can we isolate it? Well, it's being subtracted by 10. So the inverse of subtracting is adding. I will add 10 to both sides. When I do that, on the left-hand side, our minus 10 and the plus 10 will cancel. We will get just x. And on the right-hand side, we know that 5 plus 10 just gives us 15. So the answer for number 3 would be x equals 15. Now we'll get into our fourth and final practice question for one-step equations. For number 4, we have y divided by 6 equals 4. We know that the inverse operation of division is multiplication. So we'll go through here and multiply by 6 on both sides. Since we're multiplying by 6 and the y is being divided by 6, those will just cancel. So on the left-hand side, I will be left with just y. And since we multiply by the same thing on both sides, the right-hand side was 4 times 6. And we know that 4 times 6 is 24. So our answer for number 4 will 24, be y and equals. Like I mentioned, these are all of our one-step equations. Now we'll move into a few examples of two-step equations. For number 5, we have 2x minus 4 equals 8. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this 4. How are we going to do that? Well, since it's being subtracted, we will have to add it to both sides. So I'm going to add 4 on both sides. When I do that, on the left-hand side, I am left with 2x equals, and 8 plus 4 gives us 12. So 2x equals 12. We have one more step here. The 2 is being multiplied by the x, so we have to get rid of that to isolate our variable. So we will divide by 2 on both sides since division is the inverse of multiplication. When I divide by 2, our left-hand side would just be x, and we know that 12 divided by 2 gives us 6. So our answer for number 5 will be x equals 6. Now we will get into our sixth and final practice question for today. In this one, we are also using the distributive property. So remember PEMDAS, we need to distribute first. We have to do our parentheses. So I'm going to go through here and distribute this 4 to the y plus 1. When I do that, I get 4y plus 4 equals 8. And again, we're going to get rid of that plus 4 first. Since it's addition, our inverse operation here would be subtraction. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 4 on both sides. When I do that, our left-hand side ends up just being 4y. And we know that 8 minus 4 gives me 4. So we have 4y equals 4. The 4 is being multiplied to the y here, so in order to isolate our variable, we will go through and divide by 4 on both sides. When I do that, our left-hand side will simplify to just y, and we know that 4 divided by 4 gives me 1. So our final answer for our last practice problem for today, for number 6, would be y equals 1. That wraps up our practice questions on two-step equations, and that wraps up our video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Great job. This was a lot of information, so feel free to rewatch the video and take notes where you need. Feel free to share this video with a friend, subscribe if you haven't already. Please like it if you enjoyed it, and comment any other questions or any other video topics you guys would like to see down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.